Hello, hello, hello. I wish there was a way. Maybe there is a way. That's not the way. Maybe that's the way. That's not the way either. I was trying to find a way of having the video with the music behind so that I can talk and do the intro while the music's behind me. I still haven't quite figured that out yet, but I'm trying. But hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. I'm your host, Kane Sims, and I am delighted today to be joined by Phil Jordan of Homeserve, and we're going to be getting into how Homeserve is using DialogFlow in its call center, the use cases, the learnings, the value that it's bringing, and some tips and tricks for how you can do the same. But before we do that, before we bring Phil along, I'd like to give a shout out to Deepgram, our presenting sponsor. If you don't know about Deepgram, it is industry-leading speech recognition. It's all API based, and so if you're creating conversational agents, if you're creating voice bots, either in the call center, like we're going to be discussing today, or in your app, wherever you might put them, you can use Deepgram. It's got immense accuracy, it's incredibly quick, and crucially, it allows you to retrain the speech recognition models based on your specific use case, your domain, or even your specific customers. You might have certain types of accents or what have you, certain types of dialects, certain types of language or phrases, colloquialisms that are used and stuff like that. You can retrain it based on that, which means that you get higher accuracy into your NLU system, which means the whole experience ends up being far better. So if you are interested in that, please do check out deepgram.com/VUX world. That is deepgram.com/VUX world. Thank you, Deepgram, for sponsoring the show. And if you're not yet subscribed to VUX World, please do so. VUX.world/subscribe. You'll get all of the invites to epic episodes like this with industry experts and practitioners teaching you how to implement conversational AI successfully. VUX.world/subscribe. Okay, now let's get on with it. Phil Jordan, welcome to VUX World.
Okay, thanks for having me.
No worries, no worries. I've just realised as I've brought you on there, we're both part of the some kind of green T-shirt army sort of crew or something. I think we both must have had a message going on, like let's wear green today.
It wasn't in the instructions. I just winging it like a so.
Yeah. But it's nice for you to join us. Appreciate it. How's things?
Yeah, good. Yeah, very good. It's busy. I think we're definitely. I think everyone's motoring forward, especially with this kind of work. Looking at things like self-service and voice automation, there's a lot of competing technologies out there. I think it's piquing a lot of interest in almost every industry. I think it's fair to say. So yeah, definitely busy. Everything's good. Can't complain.
Good stuff. So maybe it would be worth maybe some background, certainly for the US listeners and perhaps people in Europe and beyond as well, in terms of what Homeserve does. I'm assuming there's some comparative types of companies in the US and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but maybe we can kick off just with a bit of an overview of Homeserve, and then we can talk about yourself and how you got interested in this kind of technology and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so Homeserve actually we're based in the US as well as parts of Europe, so France and Spain as well. But we are a home assistance insurance company. We sell insurance for problems in the home, so things like plumbing issues, gas issues, pest security, electrics, drainage problems as well. We'll sell insurance, and in the event that you have a problem, you can call us up, and we also have a fleet of engineers and contractors that we can then send you home, fix the problem, and fulfill that claim when we do. So that is the basis of our business, and yeah, we do it well, I think, across all those areas.
Nice. And for yourself then, head of contact channel automation and self-service. Tell us a little bit about your role, your remit, and what it is that you do with Homeserve.
Yeah, so my role is to try and progress our self-service strategy within the UK itself. So there's other teams within the other regions working on very similar things. So looking at digital self-service, but also voice self-service is one thing that we've managed to break into. A lot of maybe one of the biggest issues with the insurance industry is it's quite hard to digitize that industry. Insurance products are things that you tend not to continually use over and again multiple times within, let's say, a month or annual period. It tends to be something you use when you need it. So to try and digitize or push customers towards apps and so on in that industry is quite difficult. So we've received the majority of our claims via the phone, via customers picking up the phone and calling us, especially considering the type of insurance we sell. So looking at problems in the home, you tend to pick up the phone because you need someone immediately. You want that problem solved as fast as possible. That's the product we're selling. So we put this in place to have a look at actually what could we do within Homeserve to try and provide customers with an immediate response to that problem. So when they have an issue in the home, they identify they've got no heating or hot water, or they've got a leak or a drainage issue, they can pick up the phone and they can interact with the products at any time. That's what we were trying to accomplish with this. We started, it's been a bit of an evolution more than a revolution with Homeserve, because we started all the way back with sort of the birth of IDMV, when we want to identify who a customer is before they're calling, so we can pass that information to the agent. We can do things like pop up the policy of that customer, and we can introduce them more personally. So we don't have to go through that process of looking for records and so on. And we did that in 2016. So we at that point, we knew who the customer was. We then looked at in something called intelligent call routing, which is where now we know who the customer is, can we use certain data points to adapt the menus that we're offering? So instead of that DTMF IVR where we're offering you a press 1 for this or 2 for that, could we offer you something which is a bit more bespoke to your needs? So you've called us and we can see that you have an existing claim already, or an open claim. We can say, we can see that you have an existing claim. Would you like to talk about this? So trying to provide them with a more immediate solution to their potential problem. That was in 2017, but then we started looking at what we could do with IVR automation. So looking at directed dialogue, which is pretty much a answer this way or this way. We started seeing what we could do, because we now know who the customer is and what problem they've got. How do we start to then fully automate those claims? Because all we need after that, we just need to have a look at, obviously Rajiv Kumar's on the chat up there. He's a guy that helps us actually with the ICR automation as well. So
shout out to Rajiv. Nice for joining us. Cheers.
That's it. So yeah, we started looking at actually how can we fully automate those transactions. We've got now who the customer is, what problem they've received. Now all we need from them is a date they want us to come and fix the problem for them, and a contact telephone number. Once we've got that information, we can then go all the way through that. And we did that pretty successfully with this directed dialogue technology. But we saw the limitations immediately. When you have to almost push a customer into ways of replying, it becomes you get a lot of dropout during that journey. You get a lot of customers replying in the wrong way. We don't quite describe the issue that they're seeing in exactly the way that they want to describe it. So that's where we started looking at natural language solutions, things like your AWS's, your IBM Watsons, and your Google DialogFlows, to see what we could do to try and solve that problem of how a customer describes a problem in their home, and see if we could actually speed that process up. It was taking around 15 questions to get a customer all the way through an automated journey. Now we've got to the point with what we've done with the DialogFlow model that we've created. We can now raise claims within 2 minutes, fully automated claims in 2 minutes.
Wow, that's pretty good. That is pretty good. What is the what was the sort of the need for exploring it? I mean, obviously it sounds as though you've been on a journey. You've begun trying to get smarter about how you interact with customers, shortening down interaction times by being able to gather a bit more data ahead of time, so that the agents are equipped with likely what the issue is about and who the caller is and all that kind of stuff. So all of this sounds as though it's kind of really about trying to provide a good customer experience. There's some knock-on benefits there around. You might decrease call times and stuff like that, but it sounds as though mainly the aim is to increase customer experience. What is that the case? Like, what were some of the sort of like business drivers behind wanting to advance from the directed dialogue into more automated solutions?
Well, we got the reason why we wanted to do this is, like I said, it's about access to product. We wanted to make sure that the customers, for those simple transactions where they're just describing maybe a faulty tap, the kind of thing that almost doesn't require the human, with those repeatable high volume transactions where they're just trying to get that problem solved as quick as possible. They're trying to get the engineer into the house so they can fix their problem and get on with their lives. That's what we're trying to accomplish for them. Really, what we were trying to do was we're trying to offer that effortless self-service experience. We want to leave them more, if not more satisfied than when they've spoken to one of our representatives. So we wanted to automate some of those simpler, more high volume transactions, but we wanted to do it in a way that was easier than speaking to a human. That was one of the main goals of this program. Is always providing them with that solution when they need it, rather than almost instantly, is what we're trying to get to. So yeah, customer experience is absolutely the heart of this. We're trying to make sure that they can always access their products when they need it.
Yeah, interesting. Was there any? So I mean, a lot of call centers are facing very similar kind of issues and challenges around recruitment, high call volumes, attrition, stuff like that. Was there any things like that were part of it, or was it purely around being customer centric and trying to increase access for customers and introduce that 24/7 availability and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, because obviously, yeah, that problem is still persistent within Homeserve across both of our contact centers that we have within the UK. But we are just trying to drive that customer experience forward. We're trying to offer, almost trying to bring it to the point of which I suppose, trying to bring it into new markets. We have quite an elderly demographic at Homeserve with the products we sell. People like me, for example, sort of millennial homeowners with young families and so on. We just want access to products via multiple channels. I tend to go digital when I interact with the businesses I speak to. If we don't have those channels available, and we don't allow that kind of access, that sort of instantaneous access, so people are very time scarce nowadays. We want to make sure that they can always get access to those products whenever they need to.
And it's a interesting type of business as well, insurance, because it's a little bit like government kind of organizations where there's always an onboarding process. You move house, you register for council tax, your passport runs out, you need to get a new passport, you get a new car, you need to tax your car. But that first interaction, as high volume as it may be, because you hopefully have an increase in customers over time, there's very little actual daily involvement required, as you kind of alluded to, until something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, it's usually kind of like, well, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the sort of government space, there's this perception in people's minds that when something goes wrong, it's too specific and too personal to them, that there's never going to be a self-service solution available. So I just need to speak to somebody about this. Is that the same kind of perception that customers of Homeserve have?
I think, yeah, it is definitely a perception that we've probably had within Homeserve as well, which is that, when we're dealing with the problems that the customers are dealing with, they've normally got a fault in their house somewhere, and your house is your castle. It's probably the biggest asset that most of us own, I think, as it stands. So what we're trying to do is, there's very limited interactions that we have with our customers, maybe, once or twice, maybe perhaps even 3 times a year, where they actually need to call upon the product that we've sold. We want to make sure that, I suppose, they can easily access that, because we find ourselves in a position where customers tend not to go digital. They tend not to have the app on their phone and so on, because it's something that, like I said, you're not going to interact with very often. When you have an app, I think they expect a daily or weekly interaction with those apps in order to make them worthwhile. But yeah, you're right. It is when they do come through, we're trying to be in a position where we can take those simpler transactions. We know that the human agent is always going to be essential to every business, every contact center business, because there will always be a scenario that can't be handled by automation. We need to appreciate the limitations of this technology, as well as understand the capabilities of it. I think it's fair to say the limitations are where we need something empathetic, where a customer is experiencing a severe leak or an emergency, which we do get through our models. We actually have intents in place where we can identify if there is a severe leak, if it's causing severe damage to the home, or actually the customer's without a toilet, for example. But those are the kind of scenarios where a human has to step in, and they need to do something exceptional for that customer. So you've got to try and strike the balance between making sure that you can deal with those simpler transactions. There's ones that you just got to get out of the way. Booking a boiler service being a great example of it. It's one of those things that I don't need it immediately. I need it in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm happy to wait for it, and I just want the problem solved, or the appointment booked as quick as possible in a time that suits me. Those are the kind of transactions that we can start to remove from these contact centers.
Interesting. That's interesting. So it sounds as though you already had an idea of the kind of use cases that you might look to automate. You've kind of gone through this journey of incrementally getting smarter about kind of identifying customers, understanding their issues, tried a little bit of natural language kind of processing in the IVR, albeit kind of like directed dialogue. And now you're kind of moving into trying to do something a bit more sophisticated, using more kind of advanced NLU solutions. It sounds as though you had a rough idea of the kind of use cases you want to get to. You mentioned there Amazon Alexa, IBM Watson, Google DialogFlow. Where did you begin that journey, and how did you arrive at DialogFlow as a solution?
So we ended up using DialogFlow as a proof of concept with a development company that we were working with at the time, which they're now owned by Sabio. So Sabio is still the partner that we're working with this DialogFlow. The reason why we chose it is because we ran that proof of concept. We we tried to test some hypotheses. So we did it, we attached it to the side of our Avira estate. It's Google DialogFlow, which enters this application called Airline, which is hosted by Sabio. It's a Sabio product. And then into Twilio, which then attaches to our Avaya telephony estate, which we can then pass those calls through. We started just by asking a simple question, which was, in a few words, please say how we can help you today. Just to identify that utterance capture, to understand what the customers wanted to talk about when they're calling Homeserve. We got a lot of insight from the back of that, but the real test of the hypothesis we were trying to get out of this was, to what level of detail can we actually identify what the customer's problem is? And I think, like I said, we were very targeted on claims. Claims, those new claims, those F0 claims, are a third of what we receive from a call volume perspective. So they're relatively repetitive. Like I said, we need to know what the customer's problem is, what issue needs fixing, who that customer is, what date and time they want us to come and visit, and make sure that's the time that suits them. And then finally, what telephone number we can contact them on. And then we've essentially solved that. We can raise that claim. We have all the information we need to provide the customer the solution, the product, which is the engineer in the home fixing the problem. That's what we're trying to do. With the hypothesis we were saying, so what level of detail can we actually identify these problems? Was it to a trade level? Can we identify if it's a plumber, a drainage engineer, or a gas engineer? Can we identify it to maybe a problem type? Is it a leak, a blockage, or something else? Or can we identify it down to the problem in which we, I suppose, can attribute it to the code that the system can start to consume, which is it a blocked kitchen sink? Is it a leaking outside drain? Those are the kind of problems we wanted to try and get it to. So we did a 6-week proof of concept on this, and we actually identified, just focusing very, very targeted on our blockage journey, simple blocked problems, which is, I have blocked toilets, blocks kitchen sink, blocked outside drain. Those are the kind of things we started looking at. And actually, we identified that those sort of system consumed codes that we call fault codes here, which tell us actually whether the customer is covered for that problem that they're trying to claim for, and what engineer they need. And we found out that actually we could use this technology to do just that. So with that in mind, we put in the business case, and we started saying, actually, we think we can target our claims volume with this, and additionally things like boiler service volume as well. Because when a customer comes through in the state, they want to book their boiler service. It's a simple check to see if they're due one. If they are due one, what date and time would you like? And again, we have all the information we need. So those are the use cases we're really targeting, those high volume transactions, which I suppose from a process perspective just require the same information to be captured every time. The complexity then comes in, how do we diagnose the problem to a point in which we can identify whether they're covered and what engineer we need.
Interesting. But all of those are use cases that don't really require anything kind of out of the ordinary, so to speak, isn't it? Like, you've got the information somewhere, you just need to get to it. And the kind of resolution isn't a resolution that really needs kind of a human eye. If they're covered, they're covered. If they're not covered, they're not covered. So really, the real problem, I suppose, becomes about accurately identifying what's said. Is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the brains of the operation are in the middleware, and which sit within the CRM. So to identify if someone's covered, it's the simple passing of a code with a customer reference number. Say, here's this customer and they have this problem. Give us a yes or no back. Are they covered or are they not? It's exactly to what you said. It's identifying to an accurate level. Do we know what this problem this customer has received, or what this problem this customer is experiencing, and to what level of accuracy we can identify that? So yeah, it is all about the accuracy of that diagnosis that we want to get to.
Interesting. So you began with purely blockages, you're saying?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just looking at blockage problems, because we used to separate our Homeserve problems into trades. So it's a drainage problem, it's a plumbing issue, it's a gas problem is what we tend to find. But actually, when you start to overlay that question, which is, in a few words, please say how we can help you today, you have to start responding to the way the customer describes an issue. They don't come through and say, I need a drainage engineer. They tend to come through and say, I've got a blocked toilet. And then we have to decipher some questions to say, actually, is it inside or outside the home? Is this a problem? So we tend to do that by asking specific questions. Is it upstairs or downstairs? If it's downstairs, it's probably outside in the outside sewer somewhere. So we need to send a drainage engineer for that. If it's upstairs, it's probably a plumbing issue that we can get to. And that's the kind of way that we have to sort of decipher it. We have to work from the bottom upwards, which is, here are all our codes, here are all our problems that we can deal with that the engineers attributed to them. But then from the top down, which is, how do I design an intent model which gets me from there to here? And what questions do I need to ask which can tell me that this blockage is in the kitchen, it's the sink, and it's potentially in the outside drain. Those are the kind of things that we can that's where the complexity comes in, and that's where the guys that work on our intent model in our operations team, they put a lot of effort into that. There's lots of check-ins, lots of language updates, and lots of sort of model reviews that they like to do on that.
Interesting. So how long was that trial running for?
The proof of concept itself was running for 6 weeks, and then we shut it off. We took all the data that we bought out of it, and this was back in 2020. After that, once the business case went in, we kicked off formally. We got Sabio involved. We set up a sprint team, which was a collective of Sabio, Homeserve, a bit of operational, a bit of tech and change kind of responsibilities. Like I'm not from a tech background. My background is business improvement with Lean Six Sigma and stuff. So I'm almost a process expert is where I came from. So I was trying to lead on a program of work, which people do I need to do this? So we've got business analysts, middleware developers that sit on the Homeserve side who understand our systems, our APIs, and sort of the way our processes work within our contact centers in the field. We've got operations guys that help run the telephony and make sure that we're routing customers in the event that we've identified an intent for them to the right place, to the right team, in the right way. And then we've got the developers we're working on with Sabio, who are based all over the world. We've had guys from Ethiopia, Ukraine, Bolivia, Greece, and Cyprus as well, just working with us to sort of build the DialogFlow model up. So we sort of create the use cases, we create the requirements for them, and they go and help build. And then they've been exceptional. They've been almost merged into the Homeserve team, and we've been working with them to sort of solve Homeserve's problems, of which it's many different problems. When you start laying over automation over what was traditionally an agent journey, you start to identify slow APIs, you start to identify potentially system latency and things that you want to start to solve, and these guys have been really good at solving those problems.
Interesting. So the proof of concept went well, a business case was created, you then kind of formalized it, brought in Sabio who could implement, got the team together. What were the kind of next steps as far as the kind of use cases and stuff? Had you already identified your use cases? Were you building on top of the POC? Like, how did you approach road mapping this thing?
Yes, what we started to say is what's our opportunity within our new claims space? What could we go after? But then also, what are our opportunities? Because when we start to overlay that question, which is in a few words, please, how we can help you today, we start to then, that's what starts to draw out your use cases. So what kind of things are customers saying that they want to do? Because now, instead of identifying problems down to a skill level, which is not normally what we had a first notification of loss skill, we had an existing claims skill, a retention skill, a sales, a customer service one. All of a sudden, your customer service skill explodes into 17 to 20 different transactions that a customer wants to complete. It's not customer service anymore. It's I want to change my bank details. I want to update my address, and it's not F-not anymore. It's not first notification of loss. It's blockage issues, plumbing issues, leaking issues, toilet taps, all those kind of things that explode outwards. And then that's where you can start to target your use cases, because the one thing that you do get inundated with when you overlay robotics into your contact center is data, and trying to organize that into, okay, all these customers are saying all these things. How do I start to bucket them up to begin with, and then after I've got a bucket, I need to turn that into a glass. And then once I've got a glass, I need to turn that into a shot glass, and trying to almost segregate these things out into a transactional level, and then that's how you start to build your use cases up. You start to look at the data. You almost have to go in to these kind of programs of work with zero expectation of what may happen. I think be targeted on the kind of things you want to focus on. Like we were very targeted on, we need to be able to diagnose claims down to a specific problem type. But then also don't go in with any expectations of what you might find when you start to expand your intent model out.
Interesting. That's a really good way of approaching it. Starting with capturing the problem. The thing that often dissuades people from doing that is that people think that it's a risk in having a bot there that does nothing, that just says, how can I help you, and then hands over to an agent. And even some companies think it's a risk even trialing a bot. If you put it behind a DTMF option and you had it live for a few days and stuff like that, there's always this kind of risk about going live with something that's not quite finished. So I'm wondering if you could shed some advice on people who might be tuning in, who might be a little bit averse to just kind of putting something out there for the sole purposes of capturing data in order to inform their program. Because that is the single most important thing that
Yeah.
businesses need and also overlook. So, was there
It's,
anything that you had to do in order to implement that initial kind of, initial kind of query capture, or what advice would you give
yes.
to people
It
who
was
are?
essentially it was working closely with our risk and compliance guys. I think that's one thing. In a regulated environment, you've got to make sure that what you're doing is to the benefit of the customer. Every time we do something, it has to be to the benefit of the customer. So we knew that eventually we were going to produce a benefit off the back of this, and we made sure that we kept it relatively low scale. We focused on a single phone number, which was our website contact us phone number, which produces about 10% of our total call volume, but tends to have a mix of everything on it. So you can get there from Google. When you Google the Homeserve number, you get that contact us phone number that we can pull out. So we overlaid it onto that, but only a small proportion of that to begin with. And we started slowly ramping it up to try and get as much insight as we possibly could. So we weren't just all of a sudden flicking a switch and all of our call volume was suddenly going through this DialogFlow model. We had to start very small and then ramp it up slowly, taking the learnings we did, start to then develop an intent model, because within the first few weeks we had a point where we weren't then passing them into a secondary IVR. We were actually passing the majority of those calls directly into the contact center, because certain things that come through. I want to buy a policy. I want to make a claim. I've got a leaking pipe and so on. Before you start overlaying any automation or identification and verification on it, you can just start passing those to your agents at that point. So now they are just having a one-touch experience, which probably is significantly quicker than going through any DTMF IVR, where you have to list maybe 7 or 8 different options for a customer. Might not be the one they want. We normally finish a lot of our DTMF IVRs with an anything else option. That's where the majority of your customers tend to go, because we haven't offered them everything. I think without listening to what customers want to do and how they want to talk to you, and the way they describe the way they want to talk to you, you'll struggle to build that intent model out in an effective way.
Interesting. So you have gone through the process of doing that. Then you've gathered a lot of data. Did you do that? How long did you do that for?
In terms of that utterance capture,
Yeah.
we did it for I mean, we're still doing it now. As I say, we're still
Right.
capturing the way customers want to talk to us. We're still adding new intents to our models based on business requirements. Based on we just added this new line of business or this new product type. That's a new intent that we've got to add. I think once you got to bear in mind that when you land these things, they're a living and breathing thing. They become a virtual extension of your contact center. Especially when you start overlaying things like identification and verification into it, it all of a sudden starts consuming workload within your contact center at that point. So actually, it's taking agent workload out of the contact center. So this is now part of the operation. There's no way you can dissociate the two or just switch it off at any point. I think it's fair to say that we started utterance capture back in 2020, and we're still doing utterance capture today. But actually, we're quite happy with the way we're routing the vast majority of the calls. You always end up with it's called a default fallback. So where a customer said something that we don't understand, we haven't categorized this one yet, and we've got over 150 different intents that a customer can land in as a result of saying something off the first question. With that, we have this default fallback where a customer says something we just haven't categorized yet. So our operations team, it's Ross Parks and Matt Bailey, they weekly catch up. They have a look at what fell into that sort of 6 or 7% of customers, and try and find out a way of categorizing them in some way, maybe asking a question slightly differently to route them back in and keep them on the journey to make sure they can get to the right agent. It's probably the biggest reason why.
Interesting. So it sounds as though it all happened fairly organically then. So you've got this initial kind of greeting, which is tell me how I can help you. You do some work to try and gather that data, organize it into those kind of like bigger buckets of this is a plumbing issue, this is a draining issue, whatever, and then smaller buckets into this is specific to toilets or leaking taps or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds as though you began on the intents that you could identify but couldn't fulfill initially. You were handing those off to a live agent. Is that right? But the agent was then informed about this situation.
Yeah, that's it. So to begin with, we weren't even informing the agent. So it was a
All
case of we were asking a question, we were identifying what the customer wanted to speak about, and we were routing it to the right skilled agent at that stage. It's only when we then added identification and verification, so we then added that to it, we could then identify who this customer was, and we could start to jump on the screen pop we'd already created within the contact center. So yeah, we had to build this up slowly because we already had a capability which was doing routing, automation, as well as ID&V as well. So we had to build essentially almost pretty much the finished article on a small proportion of call volume, and then start to ramp it across. So start to consume what we'd already built and build it across that way. Because I can imagine there's a lot of contact centers out there. I can't imagine there's many just using DTMF IVRs as a freestanding thing with no data interaction whatsoever. It's a case of starting small, starting on an isolated call volume, because actually in the first instance, you're doing lots of regular releases. You're changing things here and there. You are updating this, that, and the other. You do it on an isolated call volume, you definitely reduce the risk that you're taking with your customer population. As you obviously, we robustly test anything before it lands, but you're reducing the risk of when you do land something. If something doesn't look quite right, you can just start to scale it back again, and then you can scale it back up. And those are the kind of things that you can start to take forward. But like I said, identifying the way that customers are describing those issues and trying to route them in the first instance is essential. But doing that in a safe way where you're not focusing on 100% of your call volume, because you'll drown in the amount of things you need to fix in the first instance. If you
yeah. Well, it's still one step at a time, isn't it? And over time, you take enough steps, take enough small bites, it ends up amounting to quite a lot. And the thing with conversational AI is that everything's very specific. It's not like you have arguably everything is almost long tail, because even on a broad category level, there's some specifics that are unique to each customer kind of thing. So I've got a comment from Rajiv here, Phil, from business side, what it means when every one call is self-serve. What are the area it helps or improves the whole contact center cycle? Hold on, I'm not sure.
Looking at what does it mean when we self-serve a call, essentially?
What it means when every one call is... We'll come back to that maybe, Rajiv. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Rajiv. Give us it's a bit difficult to do the reading and do the do two things at once. If you want to expand on that, Rajiv, we'll put that question to Phil. Unless it was just a comment, in which case, fair enough. So you kind of got to the point where you've begun identifying those intents. You've begun handing calls over to Live Edge. We'll come back to the identification and verification in a moment.
Yeah, sure.
You already had something which was handling claims in the POC for blockages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What was the kind of evolvement from that point? Once you'd brought kind of Sabio in, you've got an idea of which buckets you want to kind of prioritize.
Yeah.
You hand in some calls over to live agents. Was it a case of then beginning to step through, as you said, taking those small steps, chewing off each use case and starting to introduce automation gradually?
Yeah, exactly. We had to work through that cycle. Like I said, we had to identify problem type, then we had to identify who that customer is, because we can't do anything with automation if we can't bring up a policy, if we can't identify who that customer is, what they're covered for, where they live, all that kind of stuff that comes up. We can't do anything after that point. So we have to build it up slowly to take it to then the sort of next stage of the process. Because essentially the way the process works is, once we've got what your problem is, we know what engineer you need and then what you're covered for. Once we do that, we can pass that in to say, so Kane Sims has a block toilet and he lives in Bedford, for example. We can then say, where are all our engineers in that area? We can then start to offer dates and times to that customer. So we had to build this up slowly, but we stopped at the point in which we were doing ID&V to create an end-to-end automation journey. The last thing we wanted to do was start putting customers through a journey where we're asking them what date and time they wanted and then kicking them out. So we stopped at the point, we know who they are, but we can now provide them with an agent experience where they can be greeted by name and so on at the agent front. Now we've got to build an automation use case, which is we've got to pass the information into our systems. We've got to find out what availability we have for our engineers on that date that they want. And then we've got to capture a phone number. Once we have that, we have a package of information that we can then pass into our claim system to say, here's a claim for this customer, and we're going to roll that van on that day to go and fix that problem.
Interesting. At what point did you introduce the ID&V? And so it sounds as though that, as you mentioned there, that it was the initial utterance capture, problem identification, verify who the customer is, hand it over to the agent in the first instance.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So you were handed over from DialogFlow into presumably either a biometrics, or were you doing like phone number or network validation, or how did you approach the?
Yeah, so we first measure, we detect phone number, because essentially it's the property that's covered with Homeserve when it comes to claims. So we identify a phone number. We can pull a unique customer record from that phone number. We don't need to ask any more questions. We can confirm a postcode back to them to make sure that we're going to send the van to the right place and the right property. If it's the right postcode, then we'll happily carry on into that process. But for things like customer service transaction, sales and retention ones, for example, we have to do a much deeper level of data protection checks to make sure. So we ask the customer to provide the information back to us. So, tell us your policy number, tell us your postcode, just get those 3 data points that we need to capture. So we had to do almost 2 versions of IDMV to make sure that we could get customers through the journey. But we identified that pretty quickly afterwards, because like I said, we'd already done IDMV within our intelligent call routing application. So it was we had a lot of reusable middleware. And I think that's really important for when people want to start kicking this thing off. Start to ask the questions of what you've got already. If you have a digital channel where you can raise claims, for example, you probably have a lot of the APIs you need to start doing it in a voice automation manner as well. You have, if it's a similar process that you're following, you're identifying a problem type, you're trying to pull information forward from the system to offer job availability. You essentially have it already. It's just that it's in a position where you are talking about 2 very different channels. Your digital channel is very visual. You get the opportunity to display maybe a calendar. With a voice channel, the last thing you want to do is start listing the next 14 available dates that you have. You're not going to do it. So we had to work quite heavily on the way we offered dates to our customers. We first started by asking an open question, say, when would you like the engineer to come, and captured that data. About 80 to 90% of customers just said as soon as possible, today or tomorrow. So actually we said, well, why don't we offer the earliest possible date? And that's exactly what we did. I think that the kind of insight you get from your customer, from an insight perspective into what their expectations of the product are in that sense. So, I don't think we really asked the question before as to, when would you like us to come? We now had this direct verbatim voice of the customer feedback saying, actually, when do they want us to come in the event that they have a problem in their home? And we could actually pull that up, turn it into a graph, because we had the information and saying, actually, that's what they want from us.
Interesting. Good example of using conversational data and kind of making improvements off the back of it, which is again something that is, definitely best practice. So Rajiv, let's get back to Rajiv's question then. We've got, when IVR is able to provide self-service successfully, i.e. a call not going to an agent. So from a business side, apart from the average handling time, average waiting time and CSAT, what are the other areas that business benefits from it? Okay, fair enough. Let's do that then. So what are the kind of I was going to get onto that a little bit later. I might get onto that a little bit later, Rajiv, if that's all right, because I was planning on trying to get into the business outcomes and all that kind of stuff. But while we're in the middle of the kind of like implementation stuff, maybe we'll hang there for a second. So that's a good example of using that conversational data, iterating it, improving the customer experience and stuff like that. You mentioned there the importance of having the stuff that you already have, middleware that you already have, APIs that you already have, systems that you already use. Did Homeserve always have all of this stuff readily available, or was there any things that were lacking that you had to do in order to enable some of these use cases?
We had to configure a lot of things. So essentially, we've always got APIs that call from even agent front end. So if you've got a claims system essentially that's calling to a back end one to do things like pull agent availability, we have things like claims APIs. We can pull job availability APIs and so on. I think a lot of that stuff is probably ready and available within the business itself. It's a case of you just got to manipulate it. You've got to configure it to make it work for the channel in which you're working in. We don't need all the information. And one thing that hit us really hard actually when we first started doing this was actually latency was a big problem. When it comes to voice automation, if you're having a conversation with a contact center agent, I'm sure there's other contact centers out there that experience those buffering screens between, okay, I've just loaded this information, I'm going to click next on my page here, clicks across, there's a bit of 5-second buffer while it sort of loads up the information forward. It can't be afforded within a voice automation environment. So, because a 5-second wait time while you're waiting for the next question is really confusing, actually, when you sort of just provided some information, you're sort of waiting for a response back. It's not something you get even in a digital space, you can offer a sort of buffering screen to say, okay, you are waiting and expect to wait for a bit longer. So we had to manipulate and configure and even change in some way some of our APIs that we already had on board, just to make it fit the DialogFlow model we were trying to fit. And actually, we even altered the DialogFlow model to deal with some of the latency as well. So the way we were asking questions and the kinds of questions we were asking, we had to extend the amount of which, the time it took to say a phrase. And we even ask a customer satisfaction question at the end, and that's to allow the claim to be loaded into our claim system. It was actually a really nice touch, because now we get a really good understanding of the insight that the customer has following they've booked the claim. We can say, just tell us what you thought of that process, and they can give us verbatim feedback as to what they thought. And that's because of DialogFlow. We get a Looker application which loads of this information in. We can now dashboard that to say, here's what customers think of it. Here's the verbatim response that they're now giving us following making that claim. But so going back to the question with the middleware, a lot of that middleware is available. It just probably needs manipulating in some way, shape, or form to make it fit the process you want to do. But I'd always say, designing that process and drawing it out first, and saying, actually, where do I need to call for information? Where do I, what information do I need at this point in time in order to drive the next data-driven question I need to offer? Is absolutely essential. Make sure it's mapped out. Make sure you get your middleware people involved to say, that's never returning in that period of time. You're never going to get it, and all those kind of things that comes out of it. Because there are problems that you can solve pretty quickly, because that's essentially all the project becomes after you've landed automation. The whole thing is around problem solving. You end up with I call it a really leaky funnel. You've got this sort of all the call volumes coming into the top. This percentage then gets identified to a level in which we can raise a claim for it. This percentage then get IDMV'd. This percentage are eligible to raise that claim because they're covered or they don't have any existing claims already. And then this percentage make it all the way through. And essentially, you're trying to get every single one of those percentages as close to 100% as possible. And that is not one problem. It's about 10,000 different problems that you've got to go and solve. To get there.
Absolutely. And every single part of the chain, you've got potential for dropout whenever you introduce a new system, a new API, even a new prompt from a bot. You could ask it in a certain way. People might not understand it, don't really respond properly. You're then into kind of like grounding, and all of a sudden things can kind of flip out from there.
Yeah, that's some really interesting success stories off the fact of just rephrasing the question in a certain way. And things like we had a scenario where we started putting excess payments in, actually, so we can take excess payments for the claims that we're raising. We were asking questions about expiry date, so asking a customer to enter their expiry date, and you didn't realize there were so many different ways of saying an expiry date that appears on your card, such as you think 08/23, for example, it normally says, but people are saying August 23 or August 2023, and we ended up with a really big dropout rate between getting that security code and then getting the expiry date. So we just rephrase the question. So please say it as it says on your card in a month, date, year format, and then we reduce the dropout at that stage by about 20% just by rephrasing your question. We can do that in day, because that's the kind of sort of agility you get with the technology.
There's a lot to be said for the design of the applications, and one thing is getting something set up technically, but if you don't design it properly, then one, you don't provide as good experience, and two, you actually don't get what you're aiming for, which is people getting to the end of it.
Actually, the word properly is a good debate point, actually, when it comes down to what should a robot sound like when it comes down to, because you almost get some people saying to you, it doesn't sound like an agent, and almost you don't want it to sound exactly like an agent, because humans are really bad at talking to each other and getting their point across, a bit like I am sometimes when it starts to ramble. But it's a bit like when you speak to an Alexa device, for example, you don't tend to say, Alexa, I'm feeling like watching some TV. Do you mind just if you could just switch it on for me? You tend to go, Alexa, turn on the TV, and that's how you speak to a robot. So making it sound too human or making it sound too personable can often be a bad thing. You tend to get customers describing a problem in a paragraph rather than a short, snappy sentence, which is what you need when you're dealing with robotics.
Interesting. How did you? Because I know that you'd worked on the personality design and stuff like that, which tends to be the first starting point for conversation design. How did you approach that? Because I know you've given the assistant a name and all that kind of stuff. So how did the personality get crafted, and how do you make sure that in the dialogue you're kind of not giving a user a license to over elaborate, should we say?
So yeah, I think it's a really good point. Actually, we named it HANA because it's an acronym. It's Homeserve's Automated Natural Assistant is what we went for, and that was named by the team. Actually, we got to a point where we'd landed automation. We created this thing, and we had to name it because it was the team that came up with that. And obviously, we went out to brand and we said, "Yeah, is this okay? Can we call it this?" And something. They loved it, and actually, it wasn't us that started using it in anger. It became out on an internal business comms. They said, "Oh, Hannah's doing all this stuff." I'm like, "Oh, actually, I hadn't actually used the name publicly until that point. I was just calling it, the program was CCA, Contact Channel Automation." So we had named it at that point, but it was sort of named by the business at that stage because we had given it a name that we liked. But when it comes to the conversational design, it's our guy that owns the intent model. His name's Ross Parks. He puts a lot of effort into trying to reply in the same way the customer is talking to us. If they describe a leaking tap, for example, we don't go back and saying your tap fault or your tap issue. It's your leaking tap. It's the way you just described it in this way. We're going to respond in a similar way. It's trying to speak in the language of your customers because it puts them at ease. It describes the issue in the way that they're talking to us, but then also it means that they can respond in kind as well, because then you're trying to get very small snippets of information. It's very difficult to decipher a paragraph, especially when there's so much different information there. You're trying to make it really snappy, really specific. So once you've asked that very high level question, which is in a few words, please say how we can help you today, and you've got something locked down, it's then how do you ask the follow-up question in a way that gets the customer to the next stage of the process. So we'll move from I have a leak. Okay, where is the leak? Is what you're going to ask. It's in my kitchen. Okay, what's leaking? It's my sink. Those are the kind of things that you want to keep it really, really snappy. And I think we're not trying to add an empathetic tone to it or anything like that because it's a robot, doesn't feel empathy. We're trying to make it so it's fulfilling the transaction the customer wants to fulfill. If in any event the customer is struggling, we only offer one retry to identify what the customer wants, but then they are escalated to agent. There's no blockers. We don't lock anyone in a process. We don't put them in loops or anything like that. If there's any issues, they go to agent and then they can handle the call from there onwards.
That's good practice, because you're always going to get another chance on the next call, and if you're monitoring what's coming through and you're monitoring your escalations, then it's going to be resolved at some point anyway.
So that's one thing that we have as a team of people. If a customer drops out of this journey, it's not their fault, it's ours. We haven't built it right, and I think that's one thing to take forward is you can't force your customers to respond in a certain way. You have to adopt their way of speaking.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of comments here, and apologies I can't see your name. It just comes through this side just saying LinkedIn user. Is it going to be recorded and available afterwards? It is going to be available afterwards. It will be published tomorrow on every podcast player. You can subscribe to vux.world/subscribe if you want to get emailed about it, or just search for vux.world in any podcast player or on YouTube or anywhere like that, and it will be available for you without a doubt. Hello, Alex. Thank you for tuning in. Cool. So, where is it at now then to kind of like wrap up in terms of like what it's currently doing? We've gone through the journey so far, which is the proof of concept, turn that into a business case. You've got the open-ended ask around how can I help you? You take that data, you categorize it, you prioritize your use cases, you start rolling out automated transactions for that. You add the ID and V in there so you can identify who the customer is. You're escalating in the intents that you can't automate initially, automating the ones that you can. You're kind of dealing with some of the technical issues around latency and stuff like that, trying to enable the technology to be able to cater for some of these more kind of advanced use cases. You've designed, you're putting some effort into design. What is it kind of at this moment in time? What is it kind of like that the assistant that Hannah is doing today? Then you mentioned you started with drainage blockage you've got escalation. Like, so what is it that it's doing today, use case wise?
It's raising claims for all trades. It's booking boiler services and then something called a boiler health check that we do. So it's a bit like your MOT in the car. In order to be insured, you need to make sure that your boiler is soundly working when we take on the cover. So we have a boiler health check that goes with it, and we also do general updates. So if a customer calls, says, I just want to know when my appointment is, we can now start to provide that information back. And actually, we're doing 18 to 20% of our total claims now through the channel. So they're being fully automated by the voice channel. it's around 20% of our boiler services are being booked by this channel as well, and it's around 5 to 6% of our existing claims call volume is being reduced. So collectively, we're seeing around a 10% reduction in our total claims contact center workload, just being fully consumed through automation. Additionally, on top of that, there's been lots of work to see if we can be more targeted to the way we're routing calls. There's no point in having sort of like an existing claim skill anymore. We now have down to chase engineer or reschedule or cancel an appointment. We can now start to segregate those transactions into better trained agents and start to segregate these things out. And as a result of that, and providing customers with agents with whispers describing the issue, we've now reduced AHT by about 20 to 30 seconds as well within the contact center. So collectively, it's consuming probably about £1.2 million worth of the contact center workload, which means that that those agents are there when we need them to be to answer the problems where those transactions can't be fulfilled in an automated or digital fashion.
Wow, that's really impressive. That is really good. What you kind of touched on it a little bit there, getting into Reggie's question, which was around the kind of business value. So you reduced the average handling time by about 20 to 30 seconds, I think you said.
Yes.
Saving around about 1.2 million. Is that annually in the call center, broadly speaking?
Yeah, that's across the total call center. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's handling, what did you say, 5% of total calls or 10%?
10% of our total claims calls. So so all the calls we receive about new claims, existing claims, any sort of deployment activity that we get as well, it's consuming around 10% of that total workload.
Interesting. And how is it that the business is measuring this? Is it these numbers that they're measuring, or is there anything else that you're judging the success of it on?
Yeah, it's those numbers, and also we measure customer satisfaction. So we have it's called a ransom rave survey. So the provider that we use is called ransom rave, and for every claim raised, traditionally we were sending out a survey to say, what did you think of that? What did you think of the agent, and so on. How much effort did it take, and so on. And we started doing the same thing. So we essentially set Hannah up as a user, like a contact center agent. So now for every claim that Hannah raises, we send out the same survey, and we ask how, what did you think of that? And the scores are better than the agents, but I always say take that with a pinch of salt, because you tend to make the agent's life harder by removing the easiest stuff. So everything that we do successfully now doesn't hit an agent, but everything we don't do successfully does hit the agent. So you can't sort of you have to take the scores with a bit of a selection bias behind it, because the agents will receive the things that we can't handle, so that they have a bit of a harder job when you start to become better at doing these transactions.
Of course, the agents are also the people who, unfortunately, are the ones that end up getting to say no if something isn't quite right, or the policy's expired, or you're not quite covered and this isn't covered or whatever. You don't want the bot to be the one saying no. You kind of want the humans to do that because they handle it better. So inevitably, they're not going to always kind of get a positive response.
The biggest one we get is day selection. So we will say, we can be with you tomorrow afternoon, for example, and someone will go, no, I want that sooner, and we'll go, oh, okay, sorry, can't handle that. Go to agent. Like, they don't have any more availability than we've offered them, but we do have exceptions that we can start to then route them through, so they can dip into our deployment teams and start to pull in the exceptional circumstance that this customer does need us quicker in this sense, that they can start to dip into an exceptional volume and start to pull through additional engineer availability if they need to. So we don't want to go into a sort of back and forth with a customer in a robotic environment. It doesn't bode well, because if you're not getting what you want from a robot, you get immediately angry with it. It's not like you do with an agent, where you can have a decent conversation with another human. You've got to be really, really careful about how many retries you offer a customer during a journey. And we actually have, it's called a looping escalator. So if the customer says the same thing more than twice, it's kick to agent. We just try and handle almost every exception just by go to the agent. We're not finding what you want. Just go speak to a contact center agent at this point, because it keeps us safe. We don't want, the last thing we want to do is make customers angry with a piece of technology. I think that's the worst scenario.
Yeah, because they don't get angry at the technology; they get angry at the company. It's like it's Homeserve that's the problem. It's not the bot. It's
exactly. We've got to make sure that we are able to fulfill that need, and we are in the majority of cases. We can fulfill that need, but it normally requires some sort of exceptions process, which I'm not. You don't want to start building those sort of 5% scenarios into a robot, because it will never pay back for a start. I think that's one of the biggest things. You'll never if they don't come up often enough, it's just focus on the high volume, easy transactions.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because, I've often kind of advised that when you begin this, now you've alluded to it already, but when you begin this stuff, it is like employing someone because, as you said, all of a sudden there's now there's an additional part to your call center. It's handling real, actual calls,
Yeah.
and not always successfully. So you need to be on it and monitoring it and improving it over time. And it's like employing someone.
Yeah.
But it's interesting your approach to measuring the success of it in actually treating it like someone and measuring it on the same kind of metrics and values and such as you measured the actual employees from. I know Speakeasy do something similar, but it's an emerging way of measurement that at the minute.
Yeah, that's because it's performing the same task. It's consuming the same workload that would be landing with a human being if we weren't automating it. So you have to treat it with the same level of rigor and quality checks. In fact, we get a thematic review from our quality department. So the same people that do reviews on our agents are doing reviews on HANA, and we quarterly we send them a glut of calls and we say, here's some stuff, here's some successful and unsuccessful calls that we've had. Tell us what you think of them. Tell us what we can improve upon. And exactly the same way you would with a coach in a contact center or a quality check in a contact center, we do the same with HANA, because it's a case of we don't want to be in a position where you're treating this thing any differently because it's doing the same job. It's really important. And we're now getting to the stage of this operational handover, which is we've created this thing, it's consuming the workload, it now needs to belong to the contact center because it's now essential to them. Because, like I said, if it's consuming 10% of your workload, if it goes down, there's now another 1 in 10 calls that's going to enter your contact center. Very careful.
Interesting. We've got a couple of questions coming through here, Ben and Oliver. I'll get to those in a minute. But Phil, you do have an example of a call that we can play, don't you? It'd be nice to round up this with listening to how it actually sounds, and then Ben and Oliver will get to your questions.
No problem.
So we can
try again.
Get you to the right place in a couple of words. Please say how we can help you today.
Blocked drain.
Is the drain inside or outside your home?
Outside.
Thank you. Please bear with us whilst we check your policy details. This may take a few seconds. Great. I have found your details, Mrs. I just need to make sure we have the most up-to-date address details for your policy. The postcode we have for you is DN16. Is this correct?
Yes.
Now let's get an engineer booked. The earliest we can be with you is today in the morning between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Shall I book that in for you?
Yes, please.
Thanks. On the day of your appointment, can the engineer contact you on the number you're calling from today?
Yes.
Okay, please wait while I book that in for you. While I do so, in a few words, tell us about your experience of booking an appointment with us today.
Very easy.
Thanks for your feedback. Your appointment is booked today in the morning between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. The engineer may arrive at any time during the time slot, and they will call you when they are on the way to your property. Please can you ensure that there is adequate parking and provide any permits if this is required. Thank you for calling Homeserve. Would you like to discuss anything else with us today?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Nice.
That's one call reduced. I think the one thing that I would say to people with this is we tried to create something really passive. Like the majority of what the customer was saying there was yes, that's fine. Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, thank you. Because we sort of asked the question, you can go into this to say, we need to collect a postcode. Well, if you don't need to collect a postcode, you can just play one and say, is that right? Yes, it is. We need to get a date off the customer. Well, if you don't need them to provide one, you can just offer the earliest and say, is that okay? Yes, it is. You know what phone number they're calling on because you can detect that to the CLI that they're phoning on. Can they use the same phone number on the day? Yeah, they can. There we go. So, with 3 yeses, we've gone from the start to the end of an automation process without having to actually collect any information that needs to be provided by the customer because we've got it already. We can play it to you and tell you, is this okay? Yes, it's fine. If that gets you through the experience and it's passive, because anytime you ask to enter a lot of information, you can enter a phone number or an email address, it becomes very complicated. So you'll be retained for that.
Yeah, definitely. What I do like about that is what you said, the bot does the heavy lifting,
Yeah.
and it's the whole thing's over quicker than you can imagine. And even the elaboration at the end there, where the Hannah is kind of giving almost like the T's and C's, the small print. It could be here at any time and all that kind of stuff. Like, because the appointment's kind of being booked and it was done so quickly, that kind of lasting a little bit longer, you can still kind of pay attention to it because the bot's already done the heavy lifting for you. You haven't actually put any effort into the conversation so far, really.
I think it's like I said, you're fulfilling the transaction. The transaction they come for is, I've got to watch drain. It's outside my home. I need an engineer to fix that thing. I've now got that, and you've confirmed that you've got that. So the engineer will be with you on this date and time, and they'll call you when they're on the way. It's almost the product that the customer's lifted off the shelf. I've got that. I'm happy with it. So everything else is now, you need to hear this before we terminate the call. But also, we're going to ask you if it's okay to terminate the call. Is there anything else you want to discuss? If they actually answer yes to that, we can send them back around and say, okay, what would you like to discuss? And then we've had people raise second claims. We've had people put boiler services off the back of it. We've had people talk to the sales department and things like customer service as well, because it's just a case of, the call doesn't have to end there. You fulfilled that transaction. We've stopped that one call from going into the contact center, and you've got what you want out of it. It's now, what else would you like to do? Because we can offer anything else after that.
Yeah, well, once you've got the capabilities set up, you can just bring them back around to almost the beginning and run them through it again,
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Okay, we'll still got some people tuning in. If it's all right with you, if you've got another couple of minutes, I'd love to get to Ben and Oliver's question, if that's all right. So Ben, I think we kind of answered this, but maybe Ben might have tuned in a little bit later. So Ben Hazel's asking, do you set your fallbacks to 1 and then transfer to an agent, or give the bot multiple chances to clarify the customer's intent?
So we have one extra retry. So essentially, you will provide us with an intent. If we don't recognise it, we'll say, sorry, I didn't quite understand that. We'll even repeat the question actually in some ways to try and get the customer to say it in a slightly different way. We'll say, if we've just asked, what's blocked, for example, and you've provided us with something, we'll say, sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Could you tell me what's blocked? We'll try and reiterate the question back to them rather than have a standard fallback. But we only ever do that once. If they don't get it the second time, they'll hear a message that says, let me pass you through to a member team that can help, and we'll pass them through to an agent at that point. We don't want to try and sort of trap them in to try and get what we want out of them. It's a case of if we haven't done it twice, then we're probably not going to do it a third time.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure we take it from there.
That makes sense. Oliver's question is, Oliver Day, thank you for this. Is there anything that you've experienced or did during the implementation that you would definitely avoid if you had to do it a second time around?
That's a good question, and I think what's the biggest thing I'd avoid the second. I think checking things like system latency, because that was definitely one of the biggest things that hit us. Was when you're working with products like Google DialogFlow, they tend to have a hard 5-second timeout on returning information back. We'd probably consider just checking our APIs, make sure we do some robust testing, because your test environments are never the same as your production one. So we get a 1-second return of information in the test environment. It's probably 9 seconds in the prod environment when you eventually overlay everything on the back of it. I think another thing is being more prepared for the amount of data you're going to get out of this, and making sure that you've got someone who understands data and can coordinate behind it. Luckily, we did. I've got a long background of sort of process implementation and process control and so on, and our operations sort of a chatbot manager as well, that's Ross Parks again. He has got a long history of operational data and sort of organizing data into a way in which we can understand what goes on. So I think making sure that you have someone in place prepared to take this sort of glut of information and be able to organize it into readable pots, I think is really important, because there's so much additional insight you can get off the bot as well. I mean, we now provide information back to the business. So where we offered that today, tomorrow, or another date, we can now say, all the customers who are being offered a date, how many are being offered today, how many are being offered tomorrow, and how many are being offered any day in the future. And we can start to say, what's our engineer availability looking like now? Because just off the back of what we can pull out of DialogFlow. So when you learn to sort of coordinate behind the data and organize it, you get a lot of insight, a lot of powerful insights out of it.
Absolutely. There's no better data source than how people actually speak and what people are actually talking to you about. And you can feed that back into the business. You can also actually feed that back into the actual agents themselves. If you know now that offering a date is far better and more successful than just saying, when do you want your appointment booking? all of that stuff that you learn about how to design a conversation is what you can feed back into agents when you retrain and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually what we did. So we ended up taking the sort of script that we created within the bot, and we fed that back to our first notification of lost colleagues, and we adopted a script within the claim space, which was similar but not the same as what we did, to try and make it more passive, to get customers through that journey, because we were raising claims in 2 minutes. We're fulfilling a claim from start to finish, where as a contact center agent we take around 5, 6, 7 minutes to complete that claim. So it's just taking out a lot of the waste. You don't want to start asking loads of questions that you potentially don't need to. I think it's really important.
Nice. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. It's really inspiring and definitely timely, because 2022 is, I mean, the momentum behind voice AI in the call center is absolutely kind of tremendous at the moment. And, yeah, absolutely. And to be able to share that with people who are interested, tricks of the trade, pointers, learnings, and the results as well. I mean, the results have been really, really good. And the kind of message that I would sort of take from it is that there's a few interesting things there. One is being brave enough to just go with something that you aren't going to automate all initially, which I think is a big risk factor for people. We don't just want to have a bot there that says, how can I help you, and then not be able to help people. So I think there's some having a bit of bravery and going with that for the purposes of gathering data to then inform your strategy and roadmap is absolutely wicked.
I think that's actually a really interesting point. Is your executives do require a lot of trust, because there's going to be lots of stuff that you're going to write a business case, which essentially is going to have a line in it that says we're not quite sure what we're going to find when we do this thing, and it's not an insignificant investment, especially on this kind of technology, which is relatively up and coming. It's evolving quickly, and it's becoming definitely more in the public space. I mean, everyone I know has a home device in their house now, and they talk to robots all day, and I control everything in my house with it now. It's a case of, to get that business case across, there's got to be a lot of trust from your executives, and unfortunately at Homeserve, we've managed to gain that trust, and that trust has paid off as a result of this, so it's been good.
Absolutely. It's really good. Yeah, fantastic. Lots of good learnings in there. What we'll do is this will be published for those on LinkedIn. If you want to listen back to it, it'll be on the podcast players tomorrow. For those of you tuning in on the podcast, thank you so much for doing so. For those of you tuning in live, thank you as well. Thank you for the questions, Rajiv, Alex, Ben, Oliver, Ellen, Kiran. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Ellen
Sharon.
Say again?
Ellen Sharon, he was our tester.
Oh, right, Ellen Sharon, nice. Very nice name, Ellen Sharon, wicked. He says, great conversation, thank you so much. Cool, yeah. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much.